don't want to jinx it, but there's a small chance that we have a live stream and microphones and a projector all in the same room this time. We don't need a projector because we've got boring, old-fashioned analog humans present. Some of you will be alarmed by the sight of them, don't worry. Dave will take us all through it. This is the voice acting panel. It's going to run for 45 minutes rather than the scheduled hour. It's going to finish at 1:30 and we will then have a half-hour lunch and we'll pick up again back on schedule at 2 p.m. How does that sound to everyone? In that case, I'll hand you over to Dave. Please do a round of applause to make this look showbiz.
So this is the very first panel I've ever ran, so this is going to be a new experience for all of us. I'm Dave Gilbert. I have been making indie adventure games for the last 11 years. I have done 15 games worth, and all of them have voiceover. So I'm not a professional, but I've worked with a lot of actors over the course of that time. So I'm going to kind of take the angle since most of us here are designers, rather than wannabe voice actors, I'm going to try to take it from that angle of I am a director or a designer who wants to work with actors, and how do I do that? So that is roughly the angle I'm going to take here. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic down and have everyone introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Rolf Saxon.
Hi, I'm Samantha Béart.
I'm Doug Cockle.
I don't have one. I don't want to say my name now. I'm secret one.
Okay.
Did that go okay?
No, that was fine.
We'll just do another
I imagine all of us, I guess we'll all introduce each other, tell everyone what y'all do later. I guess the first question I have is, just to kind of kick things off, having worked with a lot of actors, I know that working on voicing a linear script, like a cartoon where it's just linear, you read it straight through, is very different than working on a game, which is very non-linear and it can happen in any order. So to kick things off, could y'all talk about your experiences dealing with one or the other? What do you feel the differences are between the two?
There's very few scripts that I've had in my career that are linear. Mm-hmm. They're usually all over the place. So it's something I'm kind of used to now. It does take some adjusting. I suppose with a game it's easier because you don't have to memorize it, and things can change, and often do change. Linear scripts are usually film, television, something like that. Otherwise theater is linear. But for gaming, of which these people, believe me, have far more experience than I do. So I'm just speaking about what little I know. It is never linear. I mean, you get the script, and in my case, it's usually so big you can't read the whole thing in one sitting. And sometimes, with the first one we did, Broken Sword, we didn't even get the second half until the second week. It was so big. So then you just have to sort of think on your feet and have a good producer, designer, some good people to work with, and you hold on and go enjoy the ride.
Yeah. The big difference for me is when you have a linear script, you can sort of look at a character journey and sort of see where they come from, where they're going, and there's a momentum to that you don't necessarily have when things can be out of order. So I think you have to kind of almost think scene by scene, so very specifically what that scene is. It can fall in various different places, and in that situation I'd probably say have lots of different versions, but that's not always possible. Mm-hmm. But you have to, it's a balancing act between doing something that's slightly more general so that it fits, but not so general that it becomes very bland and sort of stereotypical emotions and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main emotion. But you rely on your audio director really heavily. They're like guiding you through the dark, so that you kind of.
On a good day.
On a good day. I always like audio directors. Any other listening?
Actually, that sort of piggybacks onto the next question I had. I'm sorry, did you guys want to say anything first?
Well, I think I'll just add a small voice to this. sometimes you do get linear scripts, especially if they're smaller developers, and the game is not as epic and expansive as some of the more narrative-driven scripts out there. Vicky, can you help me out? Sorry, this is Vicky up here. You can see her over on the edge. And I worked with her recently on a game. Can we say what the name of it is? Do you remember?
We can yet. It's not out yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, what I can tell you is that we recorded that script in a linear way because it was short enough that we really could. There weren't so many branches and everything else that that we needed to take branch by branch by branch. So sometimes you do get linear scripts, but it's mostly non-linear.
Yeah, just everyone sort of summed it up. Context is really useful, particularly if we're coming in to play a small character. You will get a fantastic performance out of us if you just let us know who we are, where we are, why we are, when, the usual.
The W questions.
The W questions.
Absolutely.
Just really helpful, and that will shortcut a lot of time in the studio.
Well, it's interesting you say that you say you rely on a good director to help you, but I have noticed that when I work with actors, the ones who are worth their weight in gold are the ones who can take something out of context and with very, very little direction can just like nail it every single time. One of the last games we recorded was called Techno Babylon. There was this one actress who played a character named Max Lau, and there were many scenes where she just rattle off a bunch of technical terms like under very like intense circumstances, and she would nail it. But then when she was done, I'd ask her, "Do you have any idea what you just said? Do you know what any of that means?" And she's like, "No," but she got it. She nailed it, and that's all that matters. And I always used to think that that's like an instinctual thing. You either have it or you don't. But that's probably not true. How do you get to that point, or how can a director help you get to that point?
Well, it's like Samantha says, context. It's just the most important thing. But sometimes what will happen is that you'll get somebody who's directing quite often for the first time, and they'll want to tell you how to say each word exactly how they think it should be said, and it doesn't always work out well. And that's sort of like a micromanaging thing, because they can't work out how to like pull the levers on the actor. And the best, for want of a better phrase, but
be
you do
careful with that. Yeah.
It's fine, because like talking isn't my business. So it helps if you share a sense of humour with your director as well. But I think the best voice actors that I've seen and worked with, they get the context, they get the who am I, where am I, and they can take that and run with it. Whereas the stuff that isn't useful is what word to put emphasis on, and also being very specific about what they sound like. And that sounds like that would be your job, to say he's a very gravelly Frenchman. But I don't do that, don't wait for that. But what that leads to is a one-note performance, because there's nowhere for the creativity to be, there's nothing to leap off of. So the context is what gives you your trampoline.
Foundation, maybe?
This is why they give me scripts, okay?
Although I imagine, you say, context is important, but I imagine, especially for you, Doug, for a script like The Witcher, there's so much. I can only imagine how long that script must be. There's not a lot of time to give context for every single line. So how does that work in the booth with the director?
Well, the script for Witcher 3, including the extensions, was massive, absolutely huge. And I didn't get it all at once. I got it over the course of 3 years.
Sometimes it's just like magic, isn't it? You don't really know how you're doing it, and that's like...
I think first of all, it's important to say that not all actors can do this. Just like not all actors work well on television or on film, or not all actors actually work well in theater. Some people are more suited to the small screen than the stage. So there are people who try to get into this business, and then they get in the booth, and very quickly it becomes obvious that whatever it is that it takes, they don't have it, even if they're a very good actor somewhere else in some other medium. So it is a very particular thing. I often get asked, what's the difference between regular acting and voice acting? And I always say, well, the main difference for me is that I feel like I have to activate my imagination in a very particular and often profound way in order to put myself in the role of the character, where the character is, the situation that they're in, because you're in the booth on your own most of the time. It's very, very rare in games, at least, that you're ever recording with someone else. Sometimes you have their voice, the other person is recorded before you, so the director plays that back, and you can respond to that. But quite often, especially if you're playing a main character, I don't know if you found this, Rolf, sometimes the main character is the first one to record, so and then everybody else reacts to you, and that makes more sense in terms of how the director holds everything together as well. So you're on your own in the booth, you have no one to react to, and actors, we react to each other. That's part of what we do. So you have to really engage your imagination, create the person or people who you're supposed to be speaking with in the booth with you, which sounds like you're doing a hologram or something like that. You're not, of course, but it's a different kind of thing. When you don't have someone to act off of, you have to create that person, and that's kind of the main difference, I think.
Also, saying that when you are doing it on your own, and you're doing a scene with 3 other people and they're not there, and you usually do lay down that first track, then suddenly when you're coming in as like a day player or as the supporting, you've got that as a template, and that often will dictate how you respond to them. So and going back to what you said earlier about when you're directing, be really careful about giving line by line, word by word notes, because that'll shut down an actor in a hot second. And once we shut down, and it's not like well, fuck you. It's just when you shut us down, it takes a while to come back, and if we don't get a chance to come back, we give a crap performance. That's it.
There's something like a thing where when you have quite a micromanaging director, and you know at the end of every sentence they're going to come over your headphones and go, could you and what you're starting to do is give a line read that's a little bit uncertain, because here it comes.
Yeah. And there are sometimes when we get it wrong, and you have to say, actually what I mean is for this line to be this way, and that's fair enough, absolutely fair enough. But when you start giving the actor line after line after line, you're going to get yourself in trouble. That's not a good way to go forward. Speaking as as designers, directors, that's why you got us in. Maybe if you want to do it the other way, you should be on the microphone. And, no, I'm not being facetious. No, I'm not being facetious. There are people who do both and who are very good at it. So look at that maybe. If you've got a real thing on a character or a thing, give it a try. You may be fantastic.
To jump on the back of that, actually, I think what's helped me most, mainly I do audio drama in sci-fi and fantasy for a company called Big Finish, so we've done Torchwood and Doctor Who and mental stuff like that. Yeah. But also things like, I did Age of Wonders 3, which was very linear. It was, you have made this huge choice, here's your monologue, and this huge choice, and then sometimes I'll come in and do something very out of context. But what's helped me is finding the tone, because I play adventure games and I'm a sci-fi nut, so I have if there is a big wall of technical text, I know I've seen that before, and I know that actor managed to do it. So we'll sort of go, what's the general gist of what you want to communicate, and I'll try and sound intelligent by rattling through it.
I think just coming back to part of your question about how do actors interpret the scripts and things like that. Well, just as an example, on Witcher 3, before I went in for the first day of recording, they sent me an outline of what I was going to be recording, the storylines. So they sent me the script as well, but when you've got 200 pages of script dialogue to read by the next day, just don't bother. Because you read you can. So you read the summary. So you have an idea what you're going to be recording, so the context is there. And also, anybody who's had the wonderful opportunity to play a character again, you already have a knowledge of the character and their world and how they respond to it and everything else, so you can rely on that previous experience. If it's something brand new, completely new, you rely on the director and the developers to explain the world that your character lives in, the kind of emotional journey that the character is on, and then you use your own instincts. Who said instincts? Did you say?
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like you sort of. There's a thing that was happening on a game I was working on before, where the character started to say stuff that wasn't in the script. I mean, I was starting to say, "Can you imagine me going off script?" And I sort of went, "Oh, she's in the room," and it's sort of like you're possessed. Because you start to come out with stuff because you know this person, like in your bones rather than in your brain, and there's a lot of like, it makes you feel like a big old lovey to sort of say all this stuff, but actually, knowing that stuff and knowing what's my motivation, what's my context, what's my journey, all of that stuff goes from your brain into your heart, your body. There's a lot of bodily stuff as well, like getting the body shape of a character is so important and stuff like that. And sometimes that can just inform so much of the choices that you then make.
Yeah, watch actors in the booth.
Oh, yes.
When you're in the booth watching, I did the contortions. I know. It's like, are you serious?
It's the only way I can get this noise to come out.
And we don't even know we're doing it usually.
Yeah.
Which is really embarrassing, yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the, if you have a linear script, you see the character's journey, and you can kind of, it's a very natural flow to it. And of course you mentioned you have a 200-page script. You can't really read it or memorize it right away. And I noticed in the scripts that I give my actors, and there's often like, not only will the context quickly change from line to line or section to section, it's just every like emotional context changes. Like, here you're like screaming on a cliff top, here you're talking to your sweet daughter. It's like you got to quickly change things on a dime.
Yes.
And again, time is money. So how do you do that, or how can a director help you get there?
First thing you can do is make sure that any dying sounds or screams happen at the end of the session.
Seriously.
Right.
No, that's
yes.
It will hurt your voice.
Yeah.
So you get all the heavy stuff at the very end.
Very end. Unless you'd like them to sound croaky the whole time.
Yeah.
I think generally for emotional journey as well, I think the best audio directors, no matter what games or radio, whatever, start with the more day-to-day stuff at the beginning and become more intense.
It's interesting to see that, because I've worked with actors who sometimes...
It takes a while to warm up into it.
Exactly.
I've worked with some actors who prefer the emotional stuff at the beginning, because if they do it at the end, they're tired. So that's...
Yeah, but then you get
They're
the other
old.
stuff.
Get some more actors then, that's what
Get some better actors then. Okay.
No, get to know. That's what I said.
What did you say? What did you say? What did you say?
Get to know your actors.
Get to know my actors.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I know to do that.
Unofficially.
I'm glad that was corrected. Okay, there we go. Phew, all right. Libel alert. All right.
The other thing that I think is important, and I always say to people who are like, I want to get into game voices, and sometimes they're actual doing kind of commercial voiceovers, and I always say, go and do improv classes. Go and get loose. Get ready to say, yeah, and, which is what we do in improv. That thing where sometimes the director will throw something at you, like, but I thought this line was really sad. And it's actually he wants me to try defiant. And you can't be so set in your character that you go, my character wouldn't say that. And you're like, well, here we are in the booth. So, being loose, being able to go, do you know what, that's not what I planned, but let's give it a go. Let's give it a go is a great attitude.
That's happened to me many, many times, where an actor just tries something at random, and I really like how they read it, and I'm like, you know what, we're starting over and doing it all like that, because that's so much better. I really like that. And trusting the actors and more, because I found that when and maybe this could lead into the next question, you guys can tell me your experiences, that you mentioned it's a recurring character, so you really, by The Witcher 3, you really knew Geralt. And I imagine there were times when you just read the script and were like, Geralt wouldn't say that. Yes, he's nodding. I worked with the same actor for 5 games who played this character Joey in my Blackwell series, and he would say, yeah, thank you. He would just look at it and say, Joey would not say this. And sometimes we'd work together to kind of make it better and make it, because I feel like an actor, when they get into their character, they know it better than you. So do you guys have any experiences where you really work with the director to really improve something or change something altogether?
Yeah. I mean, also, by the way, that's such a Joey thing to say.
That's not very Joey.
I would never say that. I mean, one person's developing the character and exploring the characters, another person's still building a part up. So I'm some of the... I'm mainly batty old crones in Bertram Fiddle too. And when I came in, the script's quite small, and what happened was that when I sort of got into it, the director Seb was like scribbling in the corner of the room going, hey, wait, can I have an how dare you? Oh, actually, have you got anything like this in Cockney rhyming slang? And so we began to sort of play with ideas, and like, you know, a lot of it ended up on the cutting room floor and stuff, and will be on the outtakes really sure, because it was terrible. But some of it was great.
Outtakes are the reason why you put voice acting in your games.
I love outtakes. But yeah, that's... Sometimes you just like to play around, and that's the joy of digital as well. But you're not running out of tape, and as long as you're not being crazy about time, they're like, you've got like 4 other people to do today. Stop! Like you're in for 3 lines, go away. But yeah, just like being able to play with it is super useful.
I think when you play a recurring character. The amount of input you have in the game itself varies depending on the developer, obviously. CD Projekt Red was quite open to me and the directors on Witcher 3 and other actors as well, you know, Skyping in and saying, we just want to change this line around, we feel it makes more sense. But they were on a journey as well. I remember Witcher 1, we recorded with outsourced media, and I remember that recording session very, very well. It was long hours, and I had to push my voice really, really far down. But they absolutely knew what they wanted, and they were, you know, I was there to do a voice. That was all I was there for. By Witcher 3, one, they were getting more sophisticated in their writing, much more sophisticated, and Witcher 3 is all about the narrative. But just as an example, it's not just about lines and how they're phrased. There was a whole quest in Witcher 3 that we actually deleted, me and the director and the engineer, because when we got into the studio, we didn't have the script. The script was mailed in by CD Projekt the morning of my session, so none of us had seen it until we got there. The director and the engineer were there before me, and they had read through the summary of the quest. And they just, when I got in, they went, Doug, have a look at this. And I read it, and it was horrible. It was this horrible quest that was involved a pedophile ring and stuff like that. And, but it had some stuff that we just felt was really gratuitous. And so we called them up and we said, we really don't think this is going to do you any favors. We don't really want to do it. Can you please rewrite this? And they went, yeah, well, I'll go talk to people and we'll get.
That was by number 3, though.
That was 3.
Yeah.
2, it was a little bit looser, but on 3, I think because we'd all been on that journey, and I'd been on the journey from the beginning, they kind of started, you know, to trust that, you know, I was part of this. So yeah, sometimes the actor can actually be a really good sounding board for the ideas that you're developing. And you can tell, you can tell when an actor doesn't like a script, because they just go.
Of course, in a very professional way.
Yeah, in a very professional way.
It doesn't really come up for me in drama. I worship writers. I think they're really undervalued. Unless I can, if I can rewrite it, I'll go and do my own thing. So, and my concern is that my character sounds human. Sometimes there's a turn of phrase that's a bit off, but generally I don't say anything. But in the case of comedy, or just thinking back to doing Nelly Coot-a-lot, where I brought a lot of the actors from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with me, who've worked in comedy for decades. And that was great, and everyone was sort of trying to top each other because we all wanted to make it the funniest game that it could be. So it worked in that context. But just in my personal experience now, I wouldn't be trying to rewrite bits myself.
I think it really depends, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So as long as if you're working on an indie, they can really benefit from if you.
I think it also depends, as Doug was saying, that if you've been a part of it for a while and you know it, and they trust you and you trust them, you're not trying to put any stamp on it. You're just trying to make it, as you say, the best it can be. So that's...
And I think after a while they start writing for you, and I'm sure you've both had that. They bring your own quirks and personality into it that they may have missed before.
There's nothing quite like knowing who's going to be reading your lines, especially with Blackwell, when by the fifth one I knew exactly how the two leading actors would read their lines, and it just makes it so much easier. So yeah, I imagine with both of you guys that must have been the case, because I imagine, that they knew how George would say a line, they know how Geralt would read the line, and it's just there is a lot of freedom that comes with that, and really knowing your character's voice, literally in this case. Just out of curiosity, how much time do we have left?
I will answer that question as soon as my phone wakes up.
Okay. I just want to know if I should keep talking or if we should do Q&A.
It's 7 minutes past 1, and we'd like to wrap this up by 1:30.
Oh, we got plenty of time. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
20 minutes of questions, or do more questions of your own?
Sure. I once met Jennifer Hale, who's Fem Shep in Mass Effect, and
not Fem Shep to me, just Shep, because I never played.
Sorry, Shepard. She's and one thing I asked her, which I always ask any voice actor, but I asked her, what is something that you hate? What is the director does that you absolutely despise? And the thing she said is when they talk too much. You mentioned micromanaging. She just said just look at your actor, and if they understand it, shut up. Just because when they're in that zone, you don't want to break it. And that was a great tip, and that's something I've taken upon myself when I'm recording with other actors. So I'm posing that same question to you guys. What do directors do that you wish they wouldn't? But not that one.
Line readings.
Yeah.
It's some directors and some developers as well. They hear the voice in their head. They hear it how they think it should be. But you really have to trust the actor to bring themselves to whatever the writing is asking them to do. That's what we do. So line readings are a pain in the butt because it doesn't allow us as actors to engage our creative energy. We're just doing what you tell us to do. There's it's like, I don't know, washing the dishes. It just becomes a monotonous routine. That's not to say if there's a particular word that you think should be emphasized because of the context of the scene or the nature of the character, then suggest that. But don't tell us how to phrase the whole line. That's that's what our job is. That's what we're there for.
Yeah, some directors think they're hiring your larynx. and actually the thing that makes a really great voice actor is the brain behind the thought process, the ideas, the creativity. That's the thing that you're really hiring.
I was going to repeat exactly what you've said, but I'll add on to that. No, I think it's a pet hate of all of ours, but I've just remembered an awful director I briefly worked with because it ended quite quickly after that. He abused his power, which was he had YouTube feeds into the booth and he would go, sound like that performance from this film. You're terrible. Do it again. So I don't work with him.
You're terrible is not.
Yeah. Oh, that was all over the shop. Yeah, well, that's because I've never ever
you're just gradually eroding the voice actor's self-esteem.
That and screaming at the beginning of the day. Please don't make us scream at the beginning of the day. Thank you.
Showing off.
Yes.
Don't show off as a director or a producer. Mm-hmm. It's not interesting. It's not interesting when we do it, and it's not interesting when you do it.
In what way do they show?
Oh, when I did. When I was, it's different. We're a panic about when I was working with, now there's an actor. Did
that get on the stream? I really hope so.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. No, don't do that. That's a pet hate of mine. As I say, I have so little experience compared to these guys. I come in little bits and pieces other than mine, and that really gets me. I don't like that.
I have a funny story of years ago when I was still working in. I did all my voice acting recording from my apartment. I prefer working with local actors, and I would bring them into my apartment to record because it was cheap and I had a microphone. But I didn't realize at the time quite how dubious it sounded. It's like, hi, come into my bedroom and record.
That's a good one, Harvey.
Yeah.
I've got some great equipment.
I was very. So yeah, no one ever called me on that, and like the voices sound
Lucky
fine.
you.
But yeah, it's just things like I wish someone called me on that, saying yeah, you need to be very clear. But yeah. I lost track of that.
Oh dear.
It's over now. It's over now.
Well, there was this. I meant to go on and say there was this one story of years ago when I was recording. I think it was Primordia with this one actress named Sarah, who there was this like one set of few lines where there was like a lot of context, a lot of story that went into these few lines, and my wife happened to be recording the session, and I was like going on this long, lengthy explanation of of like where the context of these lines come from. And I'm like, yeah, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And in the video, I could just see her eyes kind of glazing over. And like I'm droning on, and then at the end of it, she's like, so this guy might have killed my sister, and I'm angry. I'm like, yep, that's it. And she's like, okay. And she was good sport about it. She didn't call me on it, but I watched that later, and I'm like, yeah, I should talk less. So as a director, that's the one thing I've learned is to talk less.
I think that's really good advice, actually. But not necessarily talking less, but it's about give the information that's needed for the actor to use their own imagination to fill in the blanks. And you can do that in all kinds of different ways. You can short, sharp sentences, descriptive words, emotional context, things like that. Give us a structure, and then we'll fill in the rest.
And in the beginning, when you're contextualizing the story or what you want, don't be afraid of speaking at that point. I mean, give us the information that we need. Don't write a book, but give us the information. That's what we need, as has been said much more eloquently.
Can I have two pet hates if you keep them quick?
Yeah.
Because I'm very angry about both of them.
That's great. That way I don't have to think of something to ask you. So yeah, please keep talking.
You never need to ask me stuff. I'll just.
Go ahead. Yeah,
It's
go ahead.
so good that I get paid to talk. Oh my goodness. So the two things they're kind of a bit dull, but they're actually really practical, and I come across a lot having worked on a lot of indie projects. The first thing is please read your scripts out loud. It sounds really obvious, but I'll sometimes get scripts and think this reads fine in my head, and then as soon as I try and say it, it's either a complete tongue twister, or just humans don't talk like that, or this character doesn't talk like that, or it's giving off something that you maybe didn't intend, like with the length of the words. So like, if it's got lots and lots of little short words in a long sentence, that can make your character sound like a machine gun, which is good if that's what you're looking for. But try them out loud before you get the actor in the booth. The other thing is sort of jumping off of what you were saying. Give actors something to do. It's quite hard to sort of play a bunch of backstory, but it is that what your actress did is to narrow it down into what action she needs to do, where she's going with this. Similarly, your lovely director who was telling you were terrible.
Oh, he tells everyone they're terrible. It's fine.
No, you're not terrible.
I watched him do it to a very experienced voice actor, and I thought, thank God there's some foot of glass between them.
Lovely. Well, that's also, it's important that you don't tell actors what not to do. So it's quite difficult to say, don't do that as angry. So you're not angry. It's like saying, don't think about a white elephant. Sometimes it's useful to say, you're angry but don't play angry, or don't let the anger out. But that's different. Just saying, no, not as sad as that. Well, what do? Give me somewhere to go towards.
Well, it's often that, I mean, this is kind of a little, like inside baseball, but I know that often what other actors have told me about that is like, yeah, they're angry, but in real life, no one really shows their emotions. They try to cover it up.
Yes.
So that's often what you have to try to do is, because this is again something that Jennifer Hale said when I spoke to her. It was kind of a workshop thing where when you're voice acting, it's like a close-up camera in a film.
Yes.
Where the camera, you hear everything. It's very intimate. Yeah, you don't need to really show emotion. the mic will pick it up.
Yes.
And often I have to tell actors to dial it down just a bit because I want to hear it, but I don't want it to be so over the top and in your face. Because that's another thing about a lot of video games, maybe less Bertram Fiddle, but definitely for The Witcher and definitely for Broken Sword, is that the characters are very grounded and they're very realistic. You don't have a lot of over the top crazy caricatures in games like that. So I know when I listen to demo reels and try to do auditions, I want to hear how the person sounds. I don't want to hear them do wacky voices. So that's just something that I do a lot.
There's screen actors who, when they coming back to do you edit the script, when they look at a script for a film, can often say to the screenwriter or the director, I don't need to say that, I can do that with a look. And similarly, a good voice actor can do it with a breath quite often. Please don't cut our breaths out, that's where a lot of the emotion lives. And so being able to say, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything so beautiful before in my life, with a the mic didn't get that. Irony. But trusting the mic to catch the emotions without pushing and going over the top.
So I guess we have, about 15 minutes left?
You have about 15 minutes left, yes.
Okay, so I guess that's a good time to open it up to everyone. Anyone have any questions for... Yes?
Hey, when you're given a character, like before you go into the room, are there any particular things you like to have about that character, like character arc or whether their personality traits or backstories? Is there anything like very particular that helps you visualize that character?
I love character art. I love it. When we started recording Witcher 3, they had art from the game all over the booth. All the main characters, monsters, critters, creatures, all kinds of things. And it's just so helpful to have that visual stimulus about the world that the character lives in. So for me, character art is fantastic. I love it.
Agree.
Do you guys have any tips for one of the hardest bits of audio that I've experienced in adventure games is like the filler audio? I've tried using the shoe on the door.
That doesn't work.
Yeah.
Always record multiples, lots of different ones. And if you can't think of it, your voice person will probably come up with, stop doing that, please try again, to make it more interesting because it's so repetitious. And that doesn't work. It's very annoying.
For Blackwell, I had Abe just sort of rattle off a bunch of reasons why he couldn't touch stuff.
Yes.
Because he's a ghost. He's like, I can't touch that. It's like, yeah, if I was corporeal, that would be great. He would just go on and for 10 minutes just recording a bunch of stuff.
Cool.
Often, like you said, there's a lot of actors have backgrounds in improv. Just let them go.
Well, that's more of a question from a localization perspective. Here in Russia, we have lots of travel games are localized into Russian and dubbed. And speaking about the Witcher 3, I was listening to the interviews of Russian voice actors. For example, Samantha Béart, who voiced over Geralt. And they said that, well, we listened to the outtakes of an English performer, and we believe that Geralt is not much of an emotional guy, but we decided for Russian version to bring more emotions. And the thing is that Geralt in Russian version, he sounds more like a jolly merchant than not the Geralt that I'm going to kill all of you. Is that a problem, and have you ever encountered such a problem when you are not aware of such things as overacting or something in a localization?
I've done localization from other languages into English. Have you guys done that? Yeah. It's particularly challenging, actually. So I really admire actors in other countries who take my work and try to translate it, because they're not just translating it into another language, they're translating it into another culture.
Yes.
So, how the English perceive Geralt or the Americans perceive Geralt is not necessarily how the Russians will perceive that character, because we're talking about archetypes as well.
Yes.
The text translation for The Witcher is perfect.
It's not about the text. It's about what a person who has grown up in Russia, speaking Russian, will hear in the voice. So now that's not to say that all localization actors get it right. They don't, but that's only if their director stinks.
Yeah.
I'm with him on that That was
Fire the
good.
director. So I think when I've done localization, I think the hardest thing is you're listening to another actor performing in a language that you may not even speak. So you're listening to hints in the voice about how that actor's approaching, again, the emotional context of the scene, and then you're trying to translate that into your language and your culture and how you think people playing the game will read that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No, that's
absolutely.
exactly it. But what reads to you as a jolly farmer? Merchant, sorry. Where did farmer come from?
Is that your interpretation?
Lost in translation already, right? That's what we're both speaking. Yeah, so sometimes you'll come across a character and in the Spanish version, the character will have a Madrid accent, and then you need to understand what that means to the Spanish audience, and then find an equivalent for an English-speaking audience, and then but will that work for the British audience and the American audience, because quite often they're not localised to both those nations. So actually you're finding lots of little cultural touch points so that they don't necessarily sound the same, but the end result is the same. So it's not an impression.
That's something as a director or as a designer you can help an actor with, is if you start looking at cultural touch points. Because oftentimes we won't have time. We get a script a day or two before and we just literally do not have the time to do that. So those kinds of things, getting back to your question, that could be a help to give to an actor.
I just kind of want to hear Doug voicing Gibraltar's Jolly Merchant now. You don't have to. You don't have to.
I have some very nice apples.
Thank you. I was hesitant about asking. I'm glad I did.
Always ask your voice actors.
Anyone else? Francisco?
So, two things. One, to back up Dave a little bit, the whole recording in apartments in New York does sound weird from an outsider's perspective, but from speaking to other voice actors, it's pretty commonplace. I mean, there's a lot of studio space.
In New York, yes.
Right, in New York, it's a New York thing. Like, there's a lot of studio space, but there's also a lot of apartment space, so make of that what you will. But my question is, for each of you, what's the most bizarre line that you've had to do?
You called it. You said.
I promised I'd never talk about this.
Well, you have to now.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like that bizarre, but I had to do an AI voice for a spaceship, and they were going for a kind of, rather than sort of a dead computer voice, they were going for more of a Knight Rider kind of knowing sort of voice, which it's a lot of fun to do. And the bizarre line was that I was going through all of the script, all this technical stuff, and that was fine. The only line I couldn't do, I kept having to redo because the engineer would come on and go, I need you to do it again because you've made it dirty. And it was just so frustrating because they were like, well, we love like the little knowing twinkle that you've got, but can you just like not do that? And what I think the problem was with the line itself. You want me to do the thing? Yeah. This is like group therapy for me. The line was, welcome aboard, Commander.
Which game was this?
I had one which I think is still floating around somewhere in an outtake, and it's reminiscent of this, and it also gets back to read your script out loud.
Yes.
So that you hear what it actually sounds like out loud. It may look good on the paper. And this one was, she found, I'm not sure I can get this exactly right. She found that her rear exit had been barred and padlocked. Looks good on paper, doesn't it?
Good night, everybody.
There is a localization problem as well, that you're like, this English is perfect, but you have no idea the context of this.
I actually hadn't read that before I said it.
Did you do that thing where you
It's on tape.
coming
Oh,
up?
no, I just started laughing as soon as it was out there. I was like, you gotta be kidding. Seriously? Yeah.
Sometimes as well, it's not what's on the page, it's what your fevered actor brain does in the booth. When you're in for a 4-hour session, especially if you're in multiple days for 4-hour sessions or longer sessions, more than 4 hours is less common now than it was in the past, but it still does happen. Things just need to get done. But sometimes, because being in the booth is not glamorous, sometimes it's actually just hard work because you're trying to get through a lot of script in a short amount of time. Actors are always aware that we're being paid by the hour, which is both good, and also we're aware that we need to be good. We need to be on form and get these lines out there so that, because there are other actors coming in an hour from now or whatever. So sometimes it can get a little bit monotonous, or tense, or just, a bit like hard work. So sometimes you'll read a line, and just because the context is in that line, if you look at it a certain way, you extend the line and make it really dirty. Just for fun.
There's a theme.
Yeah. And
Every actor does this. Every single one I've ever read.
We are powered by innuendo. That's how actors work.
There is a blooper reel out there somewhere of Geralt saying horrible things. I don't think it's actually.
Do you have a copy? Could I borrow it?
No, the engineer James was keeping it. He'd play it back to me every once in a while. You remember when you said this? Oh God.
But it does break the monotony up, like doing silly stuff and things.
I've got one. I was playing a polymorphic psychosexual alien. Just for context. And the line was, my internal organs appear to have shape-shifted into a lift shaft. That's the weirdest one.
What game was that?
Yeah, it wasn't a game.
Oh, it wasn't a game. Okay.
Just one of those dramas that I do.
Fair enough. All right. I think that's
There's one more.
it.
One more.
Oh.
Do we have time for one more?
For time, I'm afraid not.
Sorry.
We will maybe get a chance later on.
You've got a letter.
Come on.
Just shout it out. Just shout it out.
Okay, Yen or Tris?
I'm sorry, darling. It's got to be Tris.
Wow.
But Yen comes in a very close second.
Always with innuendo.
You did it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you guys, good luck. Good luck.
That was going better than expected.
For now today, since the next feature is more of Rolf. You have
Oh, you lucky
half an hour
people.
for lunch, and then we'll find out who this man is and what he's doing here.
You don't want to know. It's not. This was much better.
Thank you to our panel.